Okay, welcome, let's get underway. I do like to keep the sessions on time if we can, so starting on time and finishing on time. Welcome very much to this third of the 4 sessions that we're running on community renewable energy. So the first one was, of course, Glenn Morris, followed by Dr. Morag Mackay, and our third speaker is Lucinda Flynn. Lucinda ran the first session for Emerald last Wednesday night, and this is her second session now. And of course, next week will be Gerald Ahrens from Como Energy. And Gerald, Como Energy, for those of you who are not familiar with them, were the industry partners for Healesville Core prior to the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub being set up. And they also assisted us with the grant application to Sustainability Victoria, and we worked with them throughout the 12 months because they were part of the grant application to provide the industry support that we needed and the technical expertise to enable various projects to be initiated throughout the region for the 12 months life of the hub. So yes, Gerald will be speaking, and he's very much looking forward to meeting you and to talking with you about the work of industry partners, and in particular the specific projects that they were involved in doing feasibility studies for down in Bunyip and in Healesville, and if you've got time also at Eltham as well, or in the Nillumbik Shire area. But that's for the future. Today we have Lucinda with us, and shortly I'll introduce Lucinda to you. But before I do so, I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of this land, and also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who might be present today. Again, I would like to, because we're making videos of all of these sessions, I really would like to make it clear in each session that we're very grateful to the Victorian government and Sustainability Victoria for the funding that was provided to set up the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, and funding that has gone towards the production of these sessions. So it's been a great initiative taken by the government and Sustainability Victoria, and we've been very appreciative of that. And of course, we couldn't have done it without the hosting of the program by Emerald Community Centre and Pakenham Living and Learning, and Mary and Miriam, the managers of those 2 centres, have been very, very supportive in the program. They both applied to the Education Department for funding, and so the program is also partly funded by the Education Department through those 2 organisations, and we express our gratitude to them for that. And today, of course, with Lucinda coming on board, she has a very special offer, in that she's set up a draw from the people who were attending the session at Emerald last Wednesday, and from the people who are attending here today, to select one person at random who can receive, or could receive, a professional home energy efficiency assessment. And you'll learn more about those assessments in the session today with Lucinda. There has been a delay with the videos. We did try to work towards getting them ready very quickly after each session, but unfortunately, because we're a voluntary, Healesville Core is a voluntary organisation, we're suffering from the problem of someone having the username or password for our YouTube video library, and we can't find out who it is. So we're trying to do a workaround at the moment, and hopefully by Monday or Tuesday in this coming week, we will have them up on the YouTube video, possibly the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub site, but we'll let you know that in due course. Enough of that now. I'd like to introduce you to Lucinda Flynn, our keynote speaker today. I met Lucinda through my work as the executive officer of the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub when we were wanting to set up a home energy efficiency program, and particularly wanting to do training for community volunteers. We set up a new course and we needed to develop that course, set it up at Box Hill Institute and have a teacher for it as well. And I was introduced to Lucinda as a possible teacher, she came with rave reviews, and I concurred with those rave reviews after we had spoken, and that was also very much confirmed after Lucinda and I had worked together for a number of months in developing the content of the program at Box Hill. And Lucinda got very positive responses from the students for the work that she did there. And of course, the program was also taken up by the Hume Community Power Hub as well, up in northeastern Victoria. So I think there were something like 20 odd people involved in that program. And then the Gippsland Hub also invited Lucinda down on the basis of those two, the programs with Yarra Valley and Hume, and she did some work in Gippsland as well with various groups on home energy efficiency. So Lucinda comes with a lot of experience. She works professionally in the field. She also has a what would you call a sustainability shop over at Hurstbridge, which she runs with her husband, with all great things. If ever you get over to Hurstbridge, you could have a look at it. It's a great little shop. Lucinda has also run a number of home energy efficiency webinars for Healesville Core and the Hub, and they were all very, very successful. I'd like to introduce you now to Lucinda and hand you over to her. The program will run like this. I'm doing the introduction, obviously. We will have a break halfway through. Lucinda will sort that out with you. And we will finish at about 5 minutes. Lucinda will finish at about 5 minutes to 12, just to give me a few minutes at the end to round off and lead into the session with Gerald. So again, welcome to you all today. Great to see you all here, and I hope you enjoy the session with Lucinda. I will mute my mic and shut down my video, but I will be here in the background. If any of you would like to ask any questions, you can do that through the chat function. You can also switch on your microphone and speak. We're just a small group, so that won't be an issue. Right now, hand you over to Lucinda. Welcome, Lucinda, to our program.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but it's bucketing down here in Hurstbridge. So yeah. I was hoping to garden today, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. I'm a bit of an energy efficiency geek, you could say. It's a topic. I've been working as an energy efficiency assessor for quite some years, but I find it such a fascinating topic, and I'm hoping to convey a bit of that to you today. I feel like it's such a accessible thing for basically any Australian household, and there's almost always things that a house can do to make their homes more energy efficient. Now, I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me for 1 sec. Can someone let me know if they can see my presentation okay? Can you guys see the presentation? Yep. You can? Great, thank you. So yes, practical home energy efficiency. Practical is relevant in that one of the things I find most exciting about home energy efficiency is that it's not just for people with a big budget. It's actually something that anyone can do on any budget, whether they're renting, whether they're, in a share house, or whether they have a massive budget and can really invest in renewable technology. So it's not dependent on any of those things. And I think that surprises people sometimes, because we get marketed heavily about the bigger cost things we can do, like, installing double glazing for 40 grand and buying an EV and even putting on solar. It's not that expensive, but it is if you haven't got a budget. So this is my passion, is trying to introduce all the practical things that you can do without necessarily having to have much money. So what I do is I go into people's homes. they might call me for all manner of reasons. Could be their bills are high, or their home is just always freezing. As soon as they turn the heater off, it's freezing in winter. And sometimes they just want to reduce their impact on the environment as much as they can. So there's plenty of reasons. It's a fantastic job. I get to meet heaps of people. So part of today, the first part of it is this information on practical home energy efficiency. Then after that, I'm going to introduce the software that I use to do the energy efficiency assessments, explain how it works, and also explain how you might follow a path towards doing what I do, which I highly recommend. It's a great job. It didn't exist not that many years ago. So yeah, there's a certain step of things you can do, and I'm always happy to answer further questions about that myself later on too, if you want to contact me. So what is an energy efficient house? First of all, sometimes I think people think it's about being frugal and not turning on the heater and, you know, potentially going without comfort, when in fact it's the exact opposite. It's about making a home perform better so that you're spending less on energy but being more comfortable in the process. And that's really what our goal is. I'm not going to go in there and say you have to, you know, only use your heater between these hours and only have it at this temperature and stuff. It's very important that it works for you and that it's comfortable, because otherwise you're never going to do it, right? An energy efficient house is going to be more comfortable more of the year without turning on any heating or cooling. When you do turn on the heating and cooling, it should be easier to heat up to, you know, comfort. And then when you turn the heater off, it should retain that heat. And of course, it should cost less to run. There's plenty of reasons why people might want an energy efficient home, and people are motivated by different ones. I don't ever assume that people are environmentally motivated. They're sometimes not. Sometimes all they care about is making their bills lower, whereas other times it's the exact opposite. But bills, reducing energy use and bills, comfort and the environment are the three main ones. There are other reasons too, but they're the main ones that I would see. Australian homes, Victorian homes, but also pretty much all Australian homes are fairly notorious for being inefficient. And I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. One is that we're in a comparatively mild climate. Even though it does get really cold here, it's not sort of, you know, potentially fatal. So we've managed to get away with fairly shoddy building codes. Also, even the building codes we have now, like the 6-star rating you're meant to get when you build a new home, they're not very well policed. So even if you design a home that's 6-star and meets the standards, when it's actually built, it doesn't always come out like that. So there's a whole lot we need to do about just the building codes and keeping people to them. But also we've traditionally had very cheap fuel, gas and lots of coal. So it's never been a problem to just, you know, you're cold, okay, turn on the heater. And these things have resulted in people, just a general lack of awareness of energy and people don't know what an energy efficient house feels like. And so they don't know, you know, what they're missing in a way. And this is something I really hope becomes common knowledge. I'd love to see kids learning about it at school. I think it's a really sort of basic life skill to understand how your home works. So the three main areas of home energy efficiency that I, you know, break it into is building shell thermal efficiency. And the building shell, sometimes called the building envelope, is basically just what separates you from the air, the outside air. So it's, you know, floor, walls, ceiling, but also the insulation in those things, whether there's lots of drafts in your house, the windows, and not just the glass, but all the other aspects of the windows. So they're all the building shell thermal efficiency. And that's what will keep if you're heating in winter, that's the thing that will keep your warm air in. Or in summer, it will keep the hot air out. Then there's appliance efficiency, which is really about how well does your appliance give you what you want? So for example, how efficiently does your heater give you heat? And two extreme examples are an open fireplace with, you know, burning wood is about 5% efficient, because out of that 100% of fuel that you're burning, only about 5% comes to you in heat. So it's a really inefficient form of heating. And compare that to a new reverse cycle air conditioner. It actually will take 1 unit of energy and give you maybe 4 units of heat. So it's super, super efficient, 400% efficient. And then there's everything else is in between there. The third thing is user behavior, because you could have a fantastically thermally efficient building shell and efficient appliances, but use them really badly. And for this, I always refer back to my kids, because I have teenagers / young adults. They're having a Halloween party. I know that even though our house is 10-star scorecard, at that Halloween party, it's probably going to be operating at 1, because they're going to have the heaters on and all the lights in the house and all the doors open. And, you know, it's, yeah. So depending on how you use your house is going to make a difference as well to how efficient it is. This graph, I'm guessing you will all be aware of this, but heating is the biggest cost for most Victorian homes. And so when we look at homes, a lot of what we look at is in regard to how well can you keep heat inside and how efficiently can you heat your home. It's just a fact that it costs us the most. So it's a really good thing to hone in on. First, we'll go through the building shell thermal efficiency and appliance efficiency, but we'll begin with building shell. Because if you think about it, the building shell, if you live in a house for 20 years, that building shell is going to impact on your efficiency that whole time, whereas appliances change and you can upgrade them. So when I go to a house, I look at all of those factors that are listed on the right-hand side. And I also would give recommendations, generally speaking, in that order. But having said that, every house is completely unique. So depending, say if it is it's sort of thermally poor in all ways, except that the ceiling insulation has just been upgraded, then that would shuffle that down to the bottom of the list. But I would always look at them in this order, and then if they're all poor, that's the order I would improve them, because that's the best sort of bang for buck that you'll get. That's the best improvement in comfort and energy, cost to run, energy to use the house. Zoning is such a simple place to start and can make a massive difference. The older houses are generally well zoned because people were used to heating and cooling by zone. They didn't have ducted systems, and it's so much more efficient to heat and cool by zone. Modern houses are often purposefully made open plan and unzoned. And so sometimes with a more modern home, the first thing to do is reintroduce zones. And in fact, sometimes I'll go to an older house, like a 70s or 80s house, and all of the, not all, but a lot of the internal doors have been removed and maybe walls, you know, taken out to create bigger open zones. And then one of the first things is to say, you know, how about you think about putting up a bit of a separation between these areas? It's not only about creating smaller zones to heat or cool, but it's also about zoning out areas that might be problematic. For example, really cold laundries or bathrooms that are quite drafty. So that's useful as well. Adding additional zoning can be as simple as the picture on the left-hand side is just a curtain, a really lightweight curtain hung up across the hallway. And that house, in front of that curtain, there was a big sort of kitchen, living, dining area. And behind it, there was a really long hall, a stairwell, a big stairwell going down to another big room under the house that was all open. So by putting that curtain across the hallway, they effectively cut the amount of space that their air conditioner in the main living area was trying to heat and cool by half, which you can only imagine. It's working less hard, it's trying to heat and cool less area, and they're more comfortable. So simple and so cheap. The Japanese curtain, sometimes people think that the curtain or whatever it is has to be really solid, but it doesn't. I've even been in a house where they had the, you know, the plastic fish and chip shop curtain thingy that I walked into the house and I went, no way, that's not going to make any difference. But I walked through those you know, went through those strips of plastic, and it was really warm on the other side. So it's amazing how much just a little bit of a barrier can do. Now that middle picture, that's actually of a window with a honeycomb blind that opens sideways, which of course isn't zoning, but I imagine that in some situations you could potentially add a sideways opening honeycomb blind into a hallway to create a temporary zone. I haven't actually seen it in the flesh, so I'm not sure how it would work, but I feel like it could be a good option. And then all these pictures on the right are of how people have creatively zoned a two-story house, because a very common thing that happens in a two-story house is the stairwells open and they're living downstairs. In the winter, the heating's on downstairs and all the heat just goes upstairs. The bedrooms are beautifully toasty, but nobody's in there because they live downstairs. And these are ways you could stop that happening and keep your warm air downstairs. All right, draft proofing is a massive one. And if an older household especially did nothing more than zoning and draft proofing, they could massively improve their comfort and possibly reduce their energy bills, because when you have drafts, you're not only increasing the feeling of being cold because you've got drafts coming at you, but also you're losing the air that you're heating so frequently that your machine is working overtime trying to keep reheating that air. And they say that the average Victorian house, if you add up all the gaps and cracks, it's the same as having a metre square window open all the time. So imagine how much air turnover that's going to be. This is a graph showing the impact, the comparative impact of different kinds of gaps on a home comfort and air leakage. You can see that the very biggest impact is a chimney. And it seems quite obvious, but the amount of houses I've seen that have ducted central heating but have ornamental chimneys on open fireplaces that are used maybe once or twice a year or not at all, but the chimney is still completely open. It's actually quite common. So that's really important, just to fill them up. Then there's a large gap or hole is the next biggest one, and that would be the equivalent to what we had in our 70s house when we moved in, which is a permanently open louver window in the bathroom, constant airflow. And the third one is a surprising one. It's evaporative cooler vents. Whereas gas ducted heating systems and reverse cycle ducted heating are enclosed systems, they're not drafty. An evaporative cooler is completely open. So there's air moving from the outside through that unit on the roof and through the ductwork. And in the winter, your warm air will be going through that ductwork and outside. It's very drafty. I won't go through the rest of these gaps because we're going to talk through some of them. But this, you'll be able to look back on this and have a look at what things might apply to your homes. So to talk through some of them quickly, the first one, open chimneys. You can get various kinds of chimney blocks. You can see them on the right. The top two pictures is of one called a chimney sheep, but the one at the bottom right-hand corner is from a local Melbourne company called EcoMaster, and I do refer to them quite a bit because they've been in the energy efficiency and draft proofing business for a long time, like 25 years or something. They're extremely knowledgeable and they have really great practical products, and that's basically the company I refer people to for draft proofing. Not only do they have a great range of stuff, but they have videos showing how to do things, how to install things, and what you need. So I should make it clear I've got no link with them and no benefit to referring them, but they're such a source of information. So that is a chimney block that they have. I do know a bunch of professional draft proofers as well, and they would simply get a piece of high density polyester insulation and cut it to size and stick it up the chimney. One key thing, if you're going to fill a chimney, you can take these out as well. So if you do want to use it now and then, you can. One key thing is that you must put a sign of some sort in the fireplace just to make sure everyone knows it's closed, because you might know that there's a chimney block, but say somebody comes and house sits or something and they light a fire, you're going to regret it if there's no sign in there warning them that it's blocked up. There are plenty of things to draft seal with weather strips. If you've done any of this before, you've most probably gone to a hardware store and they do have foam and rubber strips. They sometimes work, but often I feel like they're not particularly long-lasting products, and they, they just aren't the best, basically. So you can try them. If they work, great. If they don't, I'd head to the EcoMaster store because they have some much more permanent long-term options for draft sealing. The three main things you'd be draft sealing are external doors. You want to do the perimeter and the top, also the sides and the top of the door, and have a really good door bottom seal. For external doors, that picture in the middle is the best one for a door bottom seal. It's called an RP3. So there's external doors, windows, and there's a lot of different types of windows and ways to seal them. The other thing is internal doors. The reason you would seal one of those is, remember I mentioned, say, a drafty laundry or bathroom. You could seal the door to that area, and that way that bathroom or laundry can be drafty, but those drafts aren't coming into the rest of the house and stealing your warm air away. There's also a bunch of things that you can seal with a caulking gun. And this can be, if you're in an older house, this can be an incredibly satisfying experience because a caulking gun is really cheap. And basically anywhere you see a gap or a crack, you can seal it up. The picture on the top right is a wall vent. Any houses before around the 1990s are likely to have wall vents, and we don't need them anymore. They're from when we had unflued gas heaters and kerosene heaters and things like that. You won't see them in houses or extensions from the 90s onwards. So the way to seal them is simply get a caulking gun, and sometimes you need a little piece of what's called filler rod, which is a tiny circular thing of foam. Just when the gap is big, you put that in first and then the caulking gun so that the cork has something to hang on to. Otherwise, the cork might fall, it might not be able to fill the space and will fall out. The pictures in the middle, the top one, there's just, skirting gaps, architrave gaps, gaps between wall at the bottom of wall frames, door frames, and on the right-hand side, gaps where electricians and plumbers have cut into either the floor or wall or ceiling to install something and then not filled up the gap. So those are all really easy to seal up, and you can make a massive difference to your comfort. I've heard of people that have just sealed the wall vents, nothing else, and noticed a difference in comfort straight away. Exhaust fans in the roof, most of them, if they're like the bottom right-hand side picture, are just unsealed exhaust fans. Unless it's a very new build or a new fan, it's likely to be unsealed. And what that means is they've cut a hole into the ceiling plaster and put the fan in. If you took that little grid off that's that you can see from inside your bathroom, you'll see through to the roof. Literally, you can usually see light. Luckily, there's a very simple fix for this, which is the top right-hand picture. It's called a draft stopper, and they're free under the Victorian Energy Upgrade Scheme. So that's the same scheme that you can get light globe swaps and in-home energy monitors. But a lot of people don't know that they also do the draft stoppers, and you can have as many in your home as you have unsealed exhaust fans. They'll come and install them for you. The picture in the middle is of a heat lamp, and that is the one exception of exhaust fan that can't be sealed because it just runs too hot. And so in that case, you would be draft sealing the door to the room that has that. These are the picture of the louver window and the skylight at the top right. They're both from our house when we first moved into it. The louver window is a massive source of draft, and there's a few ways to approach it. If that room already has an exhaust fan, then just seal the window. You don't need it. You've got an exhaust fan anyway, and put a draft stopper on the exhaust fan. If that window is the only source of ventilation and you need ventilation in there, if there's, for example, if there's a shower, then you could either replace the window with an openable window, or you could seal the window and install an exhaust fan. Or if you really have very low budget, or say if you're in a share house or a rental, you could just seal almost all, like leave a space this big at the top. That's probably, you know, enough to get a bit of air movement in and out, but seal the rest because the hole is just massive and huge impact. The best, of course, is to replace it with an openable window because you really don't want to have any draft coming in there. The skylight at the top right, that the mesh that you can see is not solid. It's just full of holes, basically. And skylights, especially old ones, are generally vented at the top. So that is another huge source of air being pulled up and sucked into that and out through those vents. The picture at the bottom right is called Sun Tough, and you can cut that to size and put it at that ceiling level layer to both reduce the air movement, but also because it's a cellular construction, it's a little bit like a secondary glazing thing, stopping heat moving in and out, because skylights are a massive source of heat gain and heat loss. And the middle picture there is just an openable bathroom window with a permanent vent at the top. It's an openable window, so there's no need for that vent. Just seal it up. If you have no budget, use some bubble wrap. If you have a budget, you could replace the whole window. Here are those evaporative cooler vents, and there are purpose-made covers you can buy for them, but you can also be creative and do it yourself with either of those two options. The idea with evaporative cooler vents is that as soon as you've used it for the last time in the end of summer, you seal those up and leave them sealed all winter, and then before you use it, you just open them again. And that way you're not losing any of your heated air in winter. Downlights are a source of draft that a lot of people aren't aware of. And with most people have changed their globes these days, but downlights have three issues. One is the energy use from a halogen. One is the gaps around the globe that you can see in that middle picture. And the third one is that they have to have big holes in the insulation around every light. So changing over the light globe is only one of those things, and you're left with the two other issues. If you are doing something with your downlights, one thing you can do is replace it with that image at the top left-hand side called an IC4 rated sealed LED downlight. And the IC4 means that it's rated as safe to have insulation coverage. That will solve all three issues. Another one is the picture under that, where you could have, your old fitting with a new LED globe and then put one of those downlight covers over it. And that will also mean you can insulate up to that cone, and it will reduce the air movement as well. The picture on the far right is of a much bigger fitting. I'm not sure if any of you have these in your rooms, but they're called can downlights. Those ones can also be fixed up. They just need an extra plate to go in there that the new downlight then sits in, so that it fills up that additional space. And one special note, just everything to do with draft sealing, if you do have especially an unflued gas heater, they're not very common anymore, but if you do have one, or even a flued one that is old, maybe it hasn't been checked lately, you wouldn't do any of this draft proofing in that room, because you don't want to introduce potential, poisoning from the emissions from that heater. And you would want to potentially not draft seal if you're using a wood fire as well that uses air from the room to combust. The best option is that they have their own air supply, and all of the emissions, all the combustion products are vented externally as well. So just beware if you're in either of those situations. But if you have air conditioners or any sort of ducted system, then you do not need to worry about any of that. Draft proofing is good. So ceiling insulation, there's a really important thing about ceiling insulation that a lot of people aren't aware of, which is the importance of having good coverage. That graph will show you that just having 5%, the equivalent of 5% gaps in the total coverage of your ceiling insulation, reduces the effectiveness of it by about half. So even if you have moved into a new house, it's got you know, R4 or R5 insulation, but then there are gaps around every downlight, you might only be having the experience of having ceiling insulation of less than R2.5. That's often really easy to fix. I'll show you in these pictures. See the middle top picture. You can see from the colour of the insulation at either side that it looks quite new. I'd say the insulation was fairly newly installed. It's not even dusty, but an electrician has come and installed some things, moved the insulation to the side and just not put it back. And this happens all the time. The picture on the right is another example of that. That insulation is so thick and fluffy, and if it was put there, if it was spread everywhere evenly and properly, it would be good insulation, but as it is, it's not really performing. Sometimes people go for years without realising that a tradie in their roof has displaced all the insulation and not put it back. So it's worth having a look, and if you do have any tradies going into your roof, ask them to put it back and maybe get them to send you a picture just to show how they've left the space, because you don't want to end up with your insulation not really working. Can you do ceiling insulation yourself? You certainly can, but there are lots of hazards. So it's not the sort of thing, you know, you don't sort of have your teenager go, oh, I'll go up and do it if you pay me $100. You want to make sure that it's someone who is aware of all the hazards and knows how to mitigate them. It could be dust inhalation or just, you know, the fibres from the fiberglass on your skin, electrical safety, possible asbestos, and the very real hazard of falling off a ladder or falling through the roof, which is not as uncommon as you might think. Window improvements. This is a very favourite topic of mine because there are so many different aspects to windows, and a lot of people believe that the only option they have to improve their windows is by ripping them out and putting in double glazed ones, which is fine if you have the budget for that, but it's not in everybody's capability. So I love to explain to people all the different things they can do. These are the aspects of windows that make a difference: the coverings, pelmets, glazing, frames, and the external shading. This graph shows a couple of things. Two things I want to draw your attention to. First of all, look at the stars. So the red star is showing the difference of adding a pelmet to a covering. So the red star shows single glazed windows with something like a Holland blind and no pelmet. And that's the most common sort of window I see. Then if you just add a pelmet to that same window with the same Holland blind, you can see the further reduction in heat loss. It's quite significant. And the other thing I want to show you is the arrows. The red arrow shows a standard double glazed window with no covering at all. And the blue arrow shows a single glazed window with a heavy lined curtain and a pelmet. So that single glazed window with the good covering is actually more thermally efficient than the double glazed window with no covering. So don't underestimate the value of coverings in stopping heat flowing through your windows. This can be a really simple approach for people on a lower budget because you can easily get heavy curtains, maybe not the ones that you would most like, but you can get them from an op shop or secondhand. They're not in fashion at all, so they're quite abundant, and it is going to make a big difference to your comfort. So the picture in the middle just shows a heavy lined curtain. It actually does have a pelmet on it, but it's called an invisible pelmet. Now, the concept of the invisible pelmet is, say this is your glass and this is your curtain. An invisible pelmet just sits in the space between. So generally, the function of a pelmet is, say this is your glass again, so this is outside. In the summer, the heat comes through the glass and rises up if there's no pelmet and moves into the room. In winter, the warm air that you're generating sits at the top of the room because that's what it does. It rises, touches the window, which is cold because it's touching the outside cold air, and drops into the room. So a pelmet sitting between those two things will stop both of those effects. Another option for a good window covering is the top right-hand side, which is it's a honeycomb blind that's installed inside the window reveal. And by being installed inside, it's stopping air flowing across the glass, which has the same effect as a heavy curtain with a pelmet. So the key is to stop the air flowing across the glass, because that's how the heat gets transferred. The two pictures below the honeycomb are just different options of pelmet. EcoMaster, the company I mentioned before, do have a DIY invisible pelmet kit, but you can also make them yourself. The picture at the bottom is a very, very low cost invisible pelmet, which I think is made out of cutting up weed matting or something like that, and just attaching it to that frame that the windows are on. So I'm thinking core flute election signs, you could cut them up and make them. It really doesn't matter. It's just a physical thing that you need. With glazing, it comes down to two options, really, if you're moving away from single glazing. One is to get double glazing in some way, shape or form. And the second is to get secondary glazing, which is where your original window and frame remains completely intact, and you bring a second pane and add it on. That second pane can either be glass or clear acrylic, and you can have it done professionally. There's some great companies that do it, or there's DIY options as well. So we'll talk through them now. Double glazing. Now, everyone will know the option of ripping out your windows and bringing in a double glazing company to install new ones that are double glazed. This is would be wonderful, but it is really expensive, possibly 40. I've even heard, 60 grand to do a whole house. There are some other options. So if you have timber framed windows and they're good quality, there's nothing to stop you just pulling out the single glaze. If it's a fixed window, you can just take out the single glaze and put in a double glazed pane. If it's not a fixed window, if it's an openable window, you can sometimes do the same. You just might need somebody with a little bit of handy person skills, carpentry skills, to potentially widen the frame, say for an awning window. They're not always wide enough to be able to manage the thicker double pane of glass. So there's a company in Melbourne called DIY Double Glaze, and that's what he does is he will come and measure up double glazing cut to size for timber framed windows, and then he can either teach you how to install it yourself if you're handy, or you can hire someone else, or you can hire him, or you can work with him. He's very flexible about it. He just actually wants to make double glazing possible for as many people as possible. So that's one good option. Another one is second-hand double glazed windows are quite available on online marketplaces, and often they're not used. They're just, because it's quite common these days, they might have been over-ordered or the wrong size ordered, and then a builder ends up with this sort of, double glazed window with a frame, and they don't know what to do with it, so they sell them out. To do it this way, you'd need to measure up the space and make sure that whatever is on offer is the right size. And of course, you're going to need somebody to put it in. So it's not as simple as doing the whole thing, but it will be massively less costly. I can say that we got like a French door with, the two doors and two fixed side panels, UPVC frame with double glazing, and it was $1,000, which is much cheaper than you get it for new, and it was new. And then we just had to have a builder to put it in. So it is an option, but it's a bit more fiddly. Professional secondary glazing, I've listed the main companies that do it there. Some will only, EcoGlaze, the second one down, will only work with timber framed windows. Sorry, that's not right. Thermawood, the third one down, will only work with timber framed windows. EcoGlaze will work with timber frame, but also newer aluminium framed windows. But if you've got, say, heritage steel framed, or I say heritage, I mean the older style, really thin steel framed ones, then you would need to go with someone like Stop Noise or possibly Magnetite, I'm not sure. Stop Noise will do secondary glazing for any kind of window frame. So you can have a look at their websites and see what might suit you. But with professional secondary glazing, you will get a very professional finish. I know that Thermawood, for example, if you have heritage sash timber windows, they'll take out the window, add the extra panel, they re-weight it and replace the pulley thingies to make sure everything's working well, and they draft proof as well at the same time. So you end up with a very high quality result. These are some options for much cheaper secondary glazing. This one does require some handy person skills, and it's about buying sheets of clear acrylic. You can buy it in a big sheet and then cut it to size and attach it to your window using either timber beading, like the picture at the bottom, or this person's just doing it with screws. There are some really good articles in it. If you know of renew.org.au, they are a wonderful not-for-profit organisation that promotes all sorts of energy efficiency and clean energy. And that picture from the top is from an article in Renew where they were looking at different ways of DIY secondary glazing windows. Then you've got much cheaper ones that pretty much anyone could do. I don't think you really need handy person skills. The left one, of course, is using bubble wrap on your windows, which, I'm sure that it's not the most fancy look, but if you are in a rental or have a very low budget or need an immediate effect, I know plenty of people that have done it and really noticed the benefits straight away. And it could be a great option for out of the way windows where, say, if you're, have a child's room where you pretty much, they're only ever in there to sleep and the curtains never get opened. Why not put bubble wrap there? Nobody's going to see it anyway. The picture on the right-hand side is from another article from Renew, where somebody moved into a rental with aluminium framed single glazed windows, and she wanted to improve the windows but couldn't do anything permanent. So she created this method where she got the metal edgings that you can buy from a hardware store to make your own fly screens. She got a clear plastic tablecloth and stuffed it into, with the foam like you do to make a fly screen. And she made a removable panel for each of her windows, which gives her a secondary glazing effect. The benefit from double or secondary glazing is the air gap. So it's not the glass or the acrylic that's actually giving you the thermal benefit, it's the air gap. And hence it doesn't really matter what it is. It could be clear plastic tablecloth or bubble wrap, or what's in the middle picture, which is there's different brands of it. The one I know is called Clear Comfort, and it's sort of like a very thin piece of plastic. You put some double-sided tape around your window frame, attach the clear plastic to it, and then you use a hairdryer to shrink it, and it becomes really tight and clear. You can't see it. It's also creating an air gap, and it's a very cheap way of upgrading windows. So it could be a good way to start and then see how well it works, and then you might decide to do something more permanent. Frames matter. So these blue arrows show a single glazed window with an aluminium frame, and then the second one down is a single glazed window with a timber or UPVC frame. So you can see it's better at slowing down heat transfer. And then the red ones is a double glazed aluminium frame and a double glazed timber frame. The other thing I want to show you is the difference between the middle blue and red arrow. A single glazed timber framed window is not that much different to a double glazed aluminium frame window. And I actually did an assessment yesterday where they just replaced they had really good quality, quite new timber framed single glazed windows, and they'd only replaced one of them with a double glazed, and the company had just given them an aluminium frame. They had no idea that there really wasn't that much of a benefit in that, and they were absolutely thrilled because they had been planning on going around the rest of the house bit by bit and doing the same thing. And I was able to say to them, look, if you do secondary glazing, you can keep your really good quality timber frames and your glass, add a second frame, and it's going to cost you half the price. And he was just like, I'm so glad we didn't do all the rest. So yeah, ballpark costs. The one everybody knows about, where you rip out your windows and frames and bring in new ones, is going to be between 800 and 1,000 a square metre, very expensive. Then the professional secondary glazing is about half that. Just swapping out the glass for double glazing is about 270 a metre squared, but not installed. So you do have to take that into consideration. Then DIY secondary glazing, where you cut your own clear acrylic to size, maybe 100, 150 per square metre if you're paying someone to install it. But if you're installing it yourself, it would be way less, because it's mainly the installation that costs. And then the clear comfort or the panels would be, you know, less than 100 for a lot of windows. So there's lots of options. And then the final thing is external shading, which is absolutely critical for reducing heat gain in summer. At the north, you generally want horizontal, and then at east and west, you want vertical, because the sun's dipping down low at both ends of the day. But sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that double glazing will help stop the heat coming in summer, but it really won't. The only thing that will help, that really helps, is external shading. You want to stop any sun before it hits the glass. And it can be anything. It's a physical shade. My favourite is what I've put in the picture, a deciduous vine, which gives you beautiful green leafy shade in summer, and then you have it all falls off in winter and lets the light through. But it can be shade cloth hung up, or, you know, nice mechanical extendable blinds, anything in between, just as long as it's there. Okay, so wall insulation, something a lot of people aren't aware of is that you can get it pumped in these days. So if you are renovating and you've got wall plaster off inside, then definitely putting in bats is going to be the best option, because bats are better than loose fill. But if you are not renovating, then this is so much easier than emptying out all your room, you know, basically stripping your house of plaster. I can't think of anything worse. They can come and do it within a few hours, your whole house. They do it from outside, drilling small holes. If you have brick in between the bricks, they fill them up again after they've pumped in the wall insulation, and in weatherboard they just drill little holes as well. The amount of holes just depends on how many how many bits of wood there are in your wall structure, and they use a stud finder to do that. But yeah, it's a great option. There's an excellent company called EnviroFlex that I usually refer people to. They do ceiling, wall and underfloor insulation. And the reason I refer people to them is because they send every one of their installers on a course from the Clean Energy Council on how to do it properly. And I think that's really important, because it's one thing to install insulation and it's another to do it really well. So I feel like they're not the cheapest company that will do it, but you know that you'll get a really good job. And if you think back to that 5% gaps thing, it's worth it, because you'll get the insulation that you've paid for. Underfloor insulation is useful. It sort of depends on your house, where that would fit on the list of to do. And our house, for example, is on a hill on stilts with a really quite open underfloor. And we had no floor covering at all, just floorboards with some leaks in them. So for us, it came quite high on the list because there was so much airflow underneath and it was really freezing. But if you're, the house I went to yesterday was, just a small gap between the floor and the ground on completely flat area, bricked in, and every floor had either floating floorboards or carpets, then there's not really so much of a need. This is the way it looks. You either staple it into the edges or you can strap it in. It is something you can do yourself. There are safety concerns, as with the ceiling insulation. And then the last thing is the key energy using appliances. I probably skipped over that too fast, but the ones that I generally look at are heat and cooling, hot water, and then plug-in appliances. Some of them are more impactful than others. So I don't look at all the little things, but I possibly would look at fridges, if there's a really old fridge at the house, or if you have a clothes dryer, an old-fashioned clothes dryer, they use a lot of energy too. But generally it's heating, cooling and hot water that are going to use the most energy in a house. Sustainability Victoria has wonderful pages where they will show you a comparison of the different types of appliances for a function, and they rate them in terms of how much cost they're likely to be per year to run. So it's a fantastic way to sort of get an overview and go, oh, this is where we're at, and this is where we could be. For heating, you're probably already aware that reverse cycle air conditioning is the cheapest way to heat by a long shot. Whether it's a room or a medium house, whether it's ducted or an individual system, it's the cheapest option. The cheapest by far is always going to be the individual system, because ductwork always reduces the efficiency because of losses through the ductwork. And also the system's going to be bigger, but probably heating a lot bigger space as well, because they're often not zoned. Any building shell upgrades you do will also reduce your heating costs, because you're, for example, if it's draft proofing, you're not losing all that generated heat, and insulation will help stop it moving inside and out. There are fantastic rebates for Victorian government rebates for low-income households. So anybody with a combined income of 90,000 or less, there's a new rebate that came out just in July this year, where they'll give you $1,000 to purchase and install a reverse cycle air conditioner to replace a gas heater, a wood heater, a plug-in electric heater, or a reverse cycle air conditioner that's older than 7 years. Because their technology has improved so much, they're happy to replace older air conditioners and get the much more energy efficient ones in. Some tips for making your heating more efficient without necessarily replacing or upgrading are setting the thermostat. So it's a bit like a car has a sweet spot where it runs efficiently, and it's the same with heating and cooling. The less you try and push it outside the sweet spot, then the cheaper it's going to be to run. And the more you push it, the harder it's working to try and make up that difference. So setting the thermostat is the first thing. Heating by zone. I keep mentioning heating and cooling by zone, but it's really important. Also, servicing and cleaning and checking appliances. That top middle picture was of a house I went to, and the person living there had literally just had their heating unit upgraded the week before. And when I got there, she said, look, I got this new unit, and I said to the installers, could you just check my ducts, because I feel like they're pretty old and they might need upgrading too. And they said to her, no, unless you're blowing cold air, you don't need to worry about the ducts. And she said, look, can you just look anyway, because I'm a bit worried about them. And I opened the underfloor hatch, and that was right in front of me. You can see those ducts are extremely old. There's nothing containing anything there anymore. There's just a tiny bit of insulation. So she would be, according to the scorecard tool that I work on, those would be giving 50% loss of heat just through the ducts, even if she has the most energy efficient system there is. So ductwork is really important to keep checking, see if there's gaps, see if possums or cats have clawed into it or whatever. The bottom middle picture is of an air conditioner filter that's very dirty. It's surprising how many people don't realise that they actually have filters. So every house I go into, I say, just checking that there are filters. And I reckon half of them go, no, I didn't know that. How do you get to the filter? So I have to show them. And sometimes they're filthy. You can imagine it's trying to suck air in through that. So if it's full of dust, it's working really hard, going, oh, give me air, give me air. The picture on the right is one of my absolute faves for heating. It's called a personal heating device. And the old-fashioned option, of course, is a hot water bottle. Perfectly wonderful. Electric blankets have been around for ages too, but these days you can get all sorts of fancy personal heating devices. Like this is my office chair with a heated seat pad. Often I can avoid putting the heater on in winter till it gets really freezing by just putting on my seat pad, and it heats my body rather than me having to heat all the air around me. There are heated throws, and sometimes people think these things are, daggy, maybe just if you're old. But my daughter, who's 17, loves her heated throw, because teenagers seem to like to wear less clothing than the rest of us. So we'll be in the living room with the heater on, you know, what we think is normal, and she'll have her heated throw on top of her, and we'll, you know, if we're watching telly together or something. There's also heated socks, heated dog beds. If you have an old dog with arthritis or something, there's basically anything you can imagine. And they use a fraction of the energy of trying to heat all of the air around you. So my catch cry is everybody needs at least one PhD. All right, cooling. Another beautiful chart from Sustainability Victoria, and you'll see that ceiling fans are incredibly cheap to run. They're sort of not cooling in a way because they're not literally cooling the air, but they can give you a 6-degree cooling effect just by moving the air across your body. So they're absolutely brilliant to have. Even if you have an air conditioner, I would still have a fan and use that before you turn on the air conditioner. They're also great for heating, especially if you have high ceilings or a big room. If you're heating, the heat will always naturally rise up. So a ceiling fan on winter mode will, in summer, it pushes down at you. In winter, it will be pushing air up and displacing the warm air out of the ceiling and back down to you to heat you better. So they can't, go for ceiling fans in every main room. Ducted evaporative cooling is very energy efficient to run. It's just that the last day has sort of shown it. It's so humid, and the more humidity and the more extremely hot days we get, the less appropriate they're going to be for our climate. I think 10 years ago, they were still the best option for Melbourne because of such dry heat. But I feel, my personal feeling is that in the next 5 years, they're not really going to be enough for most people. And so even if you have a ducted evaporative system, you might need to end up putting in a split system anyway. And split systems are a very efficient way to cool as well. Again, any building shell upgrades you do will reduce your need to cool because not so much heat will be getting inside. Efficient cooling tips. I've already mentioned using fans before air conditioners and with. Cooling by zone, cleaning and servicing machines, the same as everything. And the only other addition is ventilation, especially in a 2-story house. Any ability you can make to vent hot air out of that top story at the end of a hot day could be an openable skylight. But yeah, some way to flush out the hot air is really important. Hot water systems, another great graph, and you will very clearly see that the most expensive option is an old style electric resistive hot water system. Whether it's on peak or off-peak tariff, it's still the most expensive option. And that's why there are such great rebates available for swapping away from that to something else. Solar systems with a natural gas boost is technically the cheapest option. However, because so many people are installing solar panels, often people would prefer to leave their whole roof space for solar panels and then get a heat pump, which they can time, if it has a booster, to boost when you're generating solar. The other thing is solar is quite expensive to install, probably the same as a heat pump. So in general, most people these days, if they're getting off another sort of hot water system, would be moving to a heat pump. And that's what I would recommend generally too. Efficient hot water without necessarily changing the system. The first and most important one is making sure shower heads are they don't have to be the lowest flow possible, but a Wells 3-star is a good sort of sweet point where you still get a decent shower, but it's water and energy efficient. And they will use something between 7 and 9 litres a minute to, when they're running, whereas some showers still use 20 litres a minute, and you can just see all that energy running down the drain that's been used to heat. Lagging of the pipes is important. Ideally, that black stuff is lagging, which is just another name for insulation. Ideally, you want to lag the pipe from the hot water system all the way from the hot water system to where it's entering your house to go to your appliances. And if it was being installed new, ideally, that's what your plumber would do. At the very least, you want to lag it where it's outside the house, where it has the most impact from, you know, cold temperatures. And you can buy that yourself from a plumbing supplies, possibly a hardware store, I'm not sure, and just add it on. And mixer taps. That's just one that has always struck me. You know how everybody has mixer taps these days. And often I'll go into, say, a public bathroom, and the mixer tap's either at the left on warm or in the middle. But by the time you've pushed it up and washed your hands, you haven't even got to the hot water, but it's still pulled it out of the system, and it's then just left to cool down in the pipe. So any mixer taps you have, just remember to leave them on cold and try and leave them there all the time. I get frustrated actually when I go to public bathrooms where the water temperature is only warm. You don't actually have a choice. It seems to me so wasteful that they do that. Anyway, personal thing. Other appliances. The excellent thing that happened in 2012 is that the Australian government introduced the minimum standards and star ratings for all major electrical appliances. What that means is it's become really much easier for the average person to compare different kinds of things. So the key with star ratings is that it only compares like for like. The first thing you need to do, for example, if you're searching for a fridge, work out how big that fridge is that you need. If it's a 600-litre fridge, you can compare different fridges' star ratings. But you can't just look at a star rating without it being the same appliance, because a 3-star 600-litre fridge is not the same as a 3-star 300-litre fridge. So that's the key thing, just make sure it's like for like. Solar, I know you've done a big session on solar, but I'll just very quickly review it. Most people, the payback period is between 3 and 5 years. It's very fast nowadays because the prices come down so much. The other thing is that northwest or east-facing roof spaces are fine. I remember from hearing Glenn, who you've possibly had your session with already, that he said you can even put them on south-facing roofs, which I thought was amazing. It's just slightly less percentage of energy generation, but I think that's incredible, and it makes it so realistic for so many people. The current Solar Vic rebate is $1,400, and to get that rebate, you need to choose an approved supplier. But even if you're not eligible for that rebate, I always suggest use an approved supplier. They have to jump through hoops to become an approved supplier. And I feel like if you're going to invest in something, make sure it's somebody who has proven that they are a reputable solar business. So I would only ever use an approved supplier. To find one, you go to the Clean Energy Council website, and they've just got a big thing saying, a big button that says, find an approved supplier. So it's easy. Efficient use of solar, you will all probably know this too. Load shifting, where you try and use your energy where you where you use appliances at the time that you're generating energy, and that gives you the best financial benefit. Also, just things like monitoring shading. If you've had solar for 8 years, you might have had trees or bushes that have grown up without you really noticing it. So you might need to trim them to get a bit better solar generation. What help is available? Now, I just want to, because I've noticed the time is 11:10. I'm almost finished. So if you can hang on just a little bit longer, we'll have a short break. So hopefully that's okay. There's plenty of help. You can track your own energy use, compare your energy rates, investigate rebates and incentives, and potentially get a home energy efficiency assessment. So tracking your own energy use, all of us have an energy distributor, not our retailer, but the one that distributes energy in that area, and they all have a free online portal that you can sign up to. You just need your energy bill data, and you can sign up, and they give you really good information about what energy you're using and when, so you can compare and see if there's anything that you might want to change. Then there's the free in-home energy monitor that most people know about these days, free under the Victorian Energy Upgrade Scheme, and it's an alternative way of getting that data as from the portal, but this time it's through a smartphone app. You can compare your electricity and gas rates on the Victorian Government Compare site, and if you haven't already, claim the $250 bonus. You don't need to change companies or anything. You just submit a claim, and it's for every Victorian household. There are lots of rebates and incentives. The first one I've mentioned a couple of times, which is the VEU scheme, where they will install energy efficient products free for you. And there's some of them pictured on the right. Just you can go to one of the VEU companies and see what you might be able to get. Then there are certificates, renewable energy certificates that you can get for larger installations like solar systems and heaters and coolers and hot water systems. The first is the Victorian one, the Victorian Energy Efficiency Certificates, and then the federal one is STCs. Both of them give you a set amount of certificates for whatever you do, and those certificates have a value that gets traded in, and you get to take the cost off what you've installed. So amazing incentive. There are also banks that are starting to get on board with offering green loans, which give you a lower interest rate if you do certain things or meet certain conditions. There's Bank Australia, Gateway Bank, and I think CommBank has one as well. And of course, you can get a home energy efficiency assessment. Now, everything I've covered already in this presentation, you can find information yourself. You can sort it out for yourself. Absolutely. There's plenty of information out there. Sometimes people prefer to get a home energy efficiency assessment because it's all can be a bit bamboozling, and an experienced energy assessor can come into your house and very quickly pinpoint what the key things are that would help that householder. And so sometimes that's just an easier way to go about it. And the second part of this presentation will be on the scorecard, which is the particular tool that I use, what it does, what different things it represents and shows to a householder. And also I'll be talking a little bit about how you could become a scorecard assessor, whether it's you or somebody that you know. Sometimes, people want to move into a field that feels good. It is a great job. So I'll talk about that. And of course, you can win a free scorecard assessment. At the very end, there's a QR code that you follow and just fill in a quick survey about this presentation, and then you're in the running. So we'll have a quick break now for 5 minutes. Let me just check what time it is. I've got 11:13, so let's say 11:20, if that's okay with people. I'll see you back here then. All right, so Residential Efficiency Scorecard. I don't know if you would have heard of it before. It's been around now for maybe 8 years and was developed by the Victorian government to fill a gap, because we've had a rating tool for a while for new builds, but we haven't had one for what most people have, which is an existing house that could be 100 years old, could be 40 years old, but we've had no way to work out how efficient those houses are. It's now a national tool, and I just want to talk a bit about it and how you might move into that field. So what is it? It's a rating tool for existing houses. It can be used on new houses as well, but generally it's for existing ones. And it looks at both the building shell of the envelope of the house, but also the major fixed appliances. It also has information in it about the cost of electricity and gas in that area that the scorecard's happening. And so it puts all of those things together and gives your house a star rating out of 10, which is a cost rating for the house. This makes it a bit like the star rating on major appliances. They're basically telling you, if you use it in the average way, this is how much it will cost you. And that's what this is for a house. It's only delivered by accredited assessors, and it's quite challenging to become an assessor. It's definitely, you can do it if you want to, but it's not that you can just do a 2-hour course and become an assessor. So they are very careful about making sure the people doing the assessments know what they're doing. Now, this next slide is...
Floor-to-ceiling glass doors all across here. It's all about living fresh in the outdoors, isn't it?
Small double-glazed windows filled with argon gas. Now this, coupled with dynamic conductive insulation, will create a thermal envelope around the renovation.
We'll put the split system up there. Now, your new solar system, that'll offset any of the juice the AC drags out. We'll place half the panels on the east side, half on the west side.
Trying to work out the best way to renovate?
Get a Scorecard energy efficiency assessment of your plans before you start.
So did you all see that properly? Did it come out okay? Yeah, that was a bit of an experiment. I've never put a video in there before, but that to me is the biggest reason that people get me to come to their houses, is because they are aware of all these things that people have told them they should do, and they just don't know. They don't know where to begin. They don't know whether they're being told that just to sell them something or whether it will actually benefit them. And so it can be really overwhelming knowing where to start. Our homes, as we've said, are typically fairly poor, and research has just shown that people need help, and they need to know that whoever's giving them that help is trusted, and they can get a bit of a map, a roadmap of where to start and where to go and what that's actually going to do for them. So that's a big part of what I do, is try and demystify it all, so that they, I leave and they go, phew, I now know what to do first and what to do second and how it's going to impact me. So many ways, many reasons people come to me. I've mentioned already bills, comfort are big ones, and also just wanting to reduce environmental impact. But some other reasons could be that if you're about to do a renovation, you want to make sure you do it well. And a really good example of that could be that part of the renovation might be replacing all your windows with double glazed ones. And if you perhaps don't know about the frames, you might go ahead and do them all with aluminium frames without realizing that it might have been a better option. Selling or renting, this is something that is not very developed yet, where the Scorecard team is trying really hard to get Scorecard to be a part of sales notices, but there's not enough uptake yet. But that's something we hope in the future will be the case. In the ACT, you actually have to get an energy rating on your house before you can sell it or rent it, and that's what we're hoping will happen around Australia, so that people know what they're getting into money-wise when they move into a new place. There's consistently really good feedback from people that get scorecards, and I think that's thanks to the Scorecard team, who have made such an effort to make it reputable and make sure that only people who are good at giving a decent advice are doing it. There's been various trials, and that's where this information came from. But yeah, I think it's performing very well in that respect. An assessment works. You just ring an assessor. They come to your house. They measure all sorts of things about the house and enter it into the Scorecard tool and give immediate feedback to the householder. So as the site visit is happening, the end of that should be immediate feedback, so that people feel like they've got an idea what might be their first priorities. But then after that, they would get their final certificate once the Scorecard Assessor has checked everything and made sure it's right. And generally, they'll get quite a detailed report as well, giving them information and links to suppliers. That last bit does vary a bit from assessor to assessor, but I know that that's what I do. A scorecard looks at, as we've said, the building shell. So all of those things we talked about in the last presentation, and the fixed appliances, again, all the things we talked about in the last presentation. So when they come in a bit more detail, they would begin with a chat around the kitchen table, where ideally they want to find out about you and your house, how you use it, because their recommendations at the end are going to be potentially quite different if you've got a household with 3 kids under 5, or if you're a retired couple that spend most of your time in one room. People have different needs of their houses. So it's really important that the assessor understands that, so they can make their recommendations work for you. It's not a point of there being, a right and wrong way for everybody. It's very individual, working out what's best for a household. They would get a brief tour of the home, and then without you, they spend a bigger amount of time going through the home, collecting evidence, including measuring the shower flow and looking at ceiling insulation, things like that. Then they would show you their draft certificate and talk through it step by step, explaining all of the results. And then within a week, they'd send you all of their final documentation. So it can take between an hour and a half and 3, or I've even been in a house for 3.5 before, if it's a really big and complex house. And it also depends on how interested the householder is. Some will, have a list of 20 questions before you get there, and they want to talk through all of the options and all of the things. And to me, that's great. I love it when people are really, invested in it. I'll talk you through the actual certificate and what all the different bits mean. So it's a 2-page document. The very first part of the top page is the actual star rating. So that is the cost rating for that house. And the Victorian average is 3 stars, which is roughly $1,800 cost for the fixed appliances of your house. So that's just the heating, cooling, hot water, lighting. It doesn't include fridges and TVs and PlayStations and all that stuff. Just as context, if you were a 1-star house, your costs will be $5,000 or more a year to run. If you get from 3 stars to 6 stars, it goes from $1,800 to about $800 a year to run. 8 stars would be about $250 a year to run. And then 10 stars, technically you're generating more dollar value of energy with your solar as you are spending on it. So there's a lot of benefit for improving your star rating. The second section is a comfort rating, and it is showing you how comfortable your house is likely to be in hot or cold weather if you didn't have any heating or cooling. So this bit is just about the building shell, and most of the houses I see, to be honest, get 1 out of 5 bars, not what's shown here on this, but this would be a much better result. The bottom section on the first page is the rating around solar and electricity. So if you don't have solar, it will show you your rating and what it would become if you added a small system. But if you do have solar, it shows your rating and what it would be if you took the solar away. And in my opinion, that's the most useful part, because occasionally you might get a house that is 8 stars and it's like, wow, 8 stars, that's brilliant. But if you take the solar away, it's actually only 4. The highest level you can get without solar is 8 stars. So if that were the case, their rating without solar is 4. I would be encouraging them to improve their building shell and their appliances to cover that last 4 stars, so that the house and building is as efficient as it possibly can be before they start then falling back on generated electricity to sort of offset the cost. And the back page of the certificate is all about the appliances, the main ones: heating, cooling, lighting, hot water, and if there's a pool or spa. It shows 2 things. One is how efficient is that appliance compared to the most efficient on the market. And the second, the pie graphs, the pie chart is what proportion of your fixed energy cost is it likely to be. So generally, heating will be the biggest proportion unless you have some other factor in the house that's very inefficient. And the way to read them together is that, say if you've got one of those really old box wall air conditioners for cooling, it's really inefficient, gets 1 bar, but it's only equivalent to, say, 3% of your energy use. It's then not the first thing you want to prioritize replacing, because it's not using enough of your, not a big enough percentage to be worth focusing on. To become a scorecard assessor, there is quite a process. The first thing is that you have to be accepted into the program, and the next slide, I think, or a couple on, shows how to get accepted in. But once you're accepted, there is training in the scorecard tool, because it's a very complex tool with all these calculations behind it. So when you're at a house and you come out with a draft certificate, you need to understand, how did it get that? Why has it chosen those 3 upgrade options for keeping your house more comfortable? So you need to understand how it thinks, I suppose, to a degree, and how it calculates things. Then after that, you pass a written examination. Then there's an oral examination where you are in a scenario as if you're in a house and the examiner is the householder and you're giving them advice about that house, where all scorecard assessors are audited as well. So that's why we need the evidence photos so that the auditor can check those photos against what we've entered and say, yes, the evidence backs up what they've entered. Because if they discover that you've entered a whole lot of stuff that there's no evidence for, you could have made it up, and that is not good enough for a scorecard assessor. We're very determined that the assessors are not making stuff up, that it's all really accurate, and that the idea is that any assessor could go to one house and come out with the same scorecard result, because that's, we should all be using the same methodology. If an assessor, for example, if I worked for a draft proofing company, I would have to declare that at the start of the assessment. So there's any conflict of interest has to be declared. Personally, I prefer just not to be affiliated with any company, because I like the idea of being completely independent, but it's, it doesn't stop you if you do work for someone like that. If there are issues that are found out during auditing about the assessor and they're not rectified, then it's potentially they could have their accreditation cancelled. So Scorecard was Victorian, but is now all Australian governments, and there is a Scorecard team that does all the technical side, the back end of the tool, maintains it, updates the gas and electricity prices and things to keep it relevant, does all the training, auditing, examining, makes sure all of the data is kept secure, and also has a Scorecard website where there's information for people about, just fact sheets and things, how they can make their homes more efficient. These are the types of advertising that can go on real estate that, like I said, we're working on this, but it'd be ideal if every house had a Scorecard rating on it. There are loans, I mentioned this already, that some of them are offering particular low interest rate home loans. If you, for example, the Bank Australia, if you manage to increase your Scorecard rating by 1 star, you can get a lower interest rate loan, which is brilliant. There are local governments that are starting to use Scorecard for rebates. So in Victoria, Banyule, Moonee Valley, Moreland have all used Scorecard as a sort of baseline to work out the efficiency of a house, and then given householders either the Scorecard assessment free or subsidised, and then also money on top of that to make upgrades to their houses. So I think, and I hope that lots more councils will be doing that, because it's such a standardised baseline to get for a house. If you're interested in becoming an assessor, remember I mentioned that the first step is entering the program. There's 6 boxes here, but it actually falls into 3 sections. The first box is where you're completely new to home energy assessment. Say you're watching this presentation and you go, I'd really love to do that, but I've never done anything like it. Then there's a certain way you would move forward. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th boxes are all for people who have done various types of training, and they would be able to apply based on that training. Then the 6th one is if you are an experienced assessor but you haven't done any training. So because it's a field of work that didn't really exist a while back. So say if you've been doing energy assessments for 20 years, you know what you're talking about, but there wasn't even any training to be done at that time, so you haven't done any. You can still enter the program by showing examples of the reports that you might do for people and showing the Scorecard team that you know what you're talking about, basically. So in summary, those 3 areas again, if you have no previous experience and no training, there are 3 particular units that you have to complete that are accredited units that are through various RTOs, and I can help you locate those RTOs, or you can go through the Scorecard site. They can all be done online, and they're the sort of the very basic that you have to do. If you've got a qualification, then you can probably enter straight in, and if you're an experienced assessor and you can prove that you have that information, you can enter straight in as well. Stage 1 is what the previous page was about. So how do you actually get into it? And you submit all that evidence that you've either done the new training as someone who previously hadn't, or that you have done training, or that you're experienced. Second part, once you're in the program, is you get trained in the software. The third part is that you do some practice assessments, you upload them, and you get feedback from experienced assessors on what things you might have done right or wrong. Stage 4 is when you do the written and oral exam. And then stage 5 is when you've basically passed all of it. And then before you get listed as an accredited assessor, you have to show that you've got insurance and OHS training and signed the agreement, all that stuff. So it's really just the bureaucratic end of it after you've passed. Oh, and one thing I should mention is that it's possible to complete all of it, even as a newbie, within 6 to 8 weeks, but you'd have to be really serious about it. Generally, it takes people more like 3 months, especially if they're, have a full-time job on the side. So that's roughly the amount of time you'll need. There's a Scorecard website that you can go to for lots more information and lots more videos like the ones that I just showed you. These are a couple of our wonderful assessors. It is a great job I think it's a great job for people who want to potentially work flexibly, maybe have kids, want to be able to time it within school hours. Sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that the best assessors will be highly qualified, environmental engineers or something, people who are really technically knowledgeable. Whereas the reality is there is half of it's about technical understanding of thermal efficiency and things like that. But the other half is the ability to just talk to people and connect with the people in the house, talk to them in real plain language, because they're not going to understand, technical terminology about stuff. You need to be able to tap in and also give them upgrade ideas that suit what they need and are achievable for them. There's no point suggesting they do things that are just, out of bounds for them. So it's a great job. It allows you to go and meet all sorts of different people from different walks of life. I've found almost everybody. I've been in more than 600 houses and I usually enjoy myself thoroughly. People are great in general. And the ones that ask you to do an assessment, they're usually really genuinely interested and they feel really happy after you've gone there. Like I've had people say, we just feel so much more confident now about moving on. We've wanted to do this stuff and we felt worried and now we just feel relaxed because we know what to do and we know we can ask you for more help if we need it. So yeah, it's great. And I hope some of you might consider becoming an assessor. You can contact me. I've also put my email address in the chat, but feel free to ring me or email me anytime. I'm happy to help. I've mentored lots of people who are becoming assessors and I really enjoy it. You can also contact the Scorecard team or look on their website. So yeah, that's my little intro to the Scorecard. And I'll move now on to the QR code, which is how you can enter the draw to win the free Scorecard assessment. So hopefully that'll work. I did also put a link into the chat that goes straight to the form. So that's another way you can do it. While people are filling that in, have anyone got any questions about anything? Could be about your house or about Scorecard or about being an assessor, anything at all.
Yes, Lucinda.
Yes.
I'm following up on one of the things you said earlier about the wall vents in a house.
Yes.
We've had work done on our house and it included blocking up the wall vents.
Yes.
One of the things that concerned me was the ability to get fresh air into the house. If you're too blocked up, how do you go about ensuring that you've got sufficient fresh air not to have high carbon dioxide levels in the house? I have noticed our CO2 levels did go up after we had the wall vents all blocked up and some other work done. And I'm thinking, I wonder whether we should have some sort of an air exchange mechanism somehow.
Yeah, that is such a good point that you bring up. It's true. So the difference between ventilation and drafts is generally explained that ventilation is purposeful and you use it to exactly do that, to create airflow and make your house comfortable and safe. Drafts are just, they're uncontrolled. It's uncontrolled ventilation. And so when you that it is a thing that when you have a very drafty house and you seal it up, you are changing how that house functions. And it is very important then that you match the draft sealing with improvements in the ability to ventilate it. Sometimes it could be as simple as just changing habits. I've been reading up quite a bit about condensation and that sort of issue lately, mainly because it's been such a wet winter. So a whole lot of my clients have had issues with mold and condensation that they haven't necessarily had before, or it's been worse than it's ever been before. Mm-hmm. And what I learned is that condensation is about two things. One is a high moisture load in the house, and the other is where that high moisture load comes across a cold surface, which is why it often happens on windows, but it can also happen on walls and ceilings. So what I've learned is that and our house is probably quite a good example too, because it had every draft known to humankind, and now we've sealed a lot of things up. But because we had all those drafts, we became quite lazy. For example, we didn't have a range hood in our kitchen. There wasn't one here when we moved in, and we didn't bother putting one in because we didn't need it because there were so many vents. And the exhaust fans in our bathrooms, they're actually pretty crappy. And it never mattered because it never was an issue, whereas it has now become an issue. What I think is that the two things you need to do is just be really aware of where the moisture is coming from. It comes from cooking, so you need to use a range hood, and you need to have one that's going to be powerful enough to get rid of that moisture in the air. If you're having showers, the same thing. You need to have an exhaust fan in a bathroom that is up to the job, because some of them just aren't strong enough to pull out the amount of air you need. Just breathing creates moisture. So what I've read is that the simple habit of opening up the doors and windows in a house once a day enables enough of that moisture to be moved out that it can also reduce that, and that would help with the carbon dioxide buildup as well. But you have to, I suppose it's that usage thing where you actually start to more actively use ventilation, whereas before you might have just not bothered. Does that help a bit?
Yeah, I guess it does. I was thinking, I know that in like cold countries like in Scandinavia, they have special systems that are used for bringing in heat, cold air and warming up against the air that's going out. Yes, and I wondered whether any of that is useful or available in a Victorian climate.
Yes, definitely. I've known, because of course the total, I guess the one option is to build a passive house, but if you don't have a purpose-built passive house, but you've done what you have and sealed it up very well, you can get those exchanges. I certainly could find a link, because I've had information about them from people who've had them. If you want to email me, I'll find that link and send it to you. But they're systems that you would generally have, depending on the size of the house. You might have two. You might have one at that side, one at that side, or you can have more than that. And they're doing what you said. They are they're letting out air but collecting the heat, and then letting in air but collecting that heat again to come back inside. So they're definitely an option if you're that well sealed that that's happening. Are you happy to send me an email and I'll find you a link?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. The other question I have is the diagram you showed earlier on about having a fire in a wood fire in the house. We've got a Kunara, or actually it's a different brand, but it's the same sort of thing. We had the vents sealed up in the room where that is, and I'm thinking, how do I know if I've got a CO2 leak into the room? Because it looked like the diagram that you had on the left-hand side of your drawing. How can I tell who do I have to talk to find out whether we got the right sort of thing? Yeah,
you can get monitors for that. I know I've heard of people having them where they measure I think it's called the particulate matter in the air, which is pretty much whatever's potentially coming out of that heater. And people that I've done this training with actually have gone home and got one of those, and then they'll say, oh yeah, we really noticed when we turn the fire on that the particulate matter goes way up for the first half hour and then it levels out. So there's definitely ways you can do that. I could find a link for that too if you like.
Yeah, okay, that'd be great.
I'm in our local clean energy group, and I know that one of our members has one of them because he talks about it sometimes. So I'll find that out too.
Could you send
Excellent.
it to
Thank you.
everyone?
Thank you.
Is it possible to
Yes.
send that in?
I can either do that through, I'm just not sure how. If you email me, I can certainly send it to you. The other way is I can try and send it through Jeff to the Emerald or Pakenham people to send to you.
Yeah, I think that's probably the simplest thing to do.
Just send it via you, Jeff?
Yeah, send it to me and I'll get
Yeah.
Miriam and Mary
Okay.
to circulate.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good. Any other questions?
I have one, Lucinda.
Yeah.
I'm have been involved, as you know, with a couple of units being constructed in Healesville, and
Yes.
they checked the exhaust fans, and exhaust fans that I've actually got in an existing house have those little sort of vents over the top of the exhaust fan. But with these new exhaust fans, what they do is they have some ducting that takes that comes from the exhaust fan across the ceiling and then through an external wall, and then there's a plastic cover on the external wall that opens and closes with the fan.
Yeah.
It seems to me that that's a significant weakness in these systems, because all you've got between the external air and the inside of the building is a very thin piece of plastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you're right, but that is still considered the best practice. Only because generally our exhaust fans are venting straight into our ceiling, which is I guess it's also only a piece of plastic between the exhaust fan and the internal ceiling. And the thing is that by venting into the ceiling, you're introducing all of that moisture straight into the ceiling space, which can collect in the insulation and can cause condensation issues in itself. So either way, if they're probably both not perfect, but we need the ceiling, the ventilation as well. So I don't know what the answer is to that, Jeff.
Yeah, I think
open a window.
I think what's required is that with the plastic vents that are exposed to the external environment, you need some sort of insulation on those vents, so that the vents themselves, the panels in the vents, are actually quite thick with some form of insulation. So that, but then the question is how they would open up. Would they open up or not? You'd need to have a draft that was sufficient to drive them. But I think it's a weakness in the design, actually.
I'm wondering whether there, in Australia we seem to lag behind. I'm wondering in some European countries if they might have a fan that already does what you're talking about, because they'd have to, surely, if it's minus 40 outside.
You'd think so.
You'd think so, yeah. Yeah, but I'm afraid I don't know. That's
okay. I'll follow it up.
Yeah, yep. Any other questions? Did anyone try the activity that I sent out?
I did try it. I found it quite difficult, actually.
Did you?
My own appliance, I couldn't find anything as to where the information was, but it's kind of probably tucked away and covered up by objects. So I suspect that's why I couldn't get.
What sort of appliance is it that you've got?
It's an outside water heater, gas.
So did you try looking in the little hatch at the bottom?
Yeah, I couldn't get in there. That's my point. So
okay.
But I did have one question about that, just from previous experience, and not in this current property, but in a previous property I sold and moved into a rental. So I moved from having a fairly old, same sort of thing outside. Actually, it wasn't outside, it was in the laundry room, gas water heater.
Yeah.
Family of 4. moved to a house that had the instant hot water gas, and our bills were phenomenal.
Higher
Yeah.
with the instant.
Yeah.
Now, the immediate thing that springs to mind is the shower heads.
Maybe.
Were they, because if they were really high flow as opposed to low flow.
Possible. Yeah. I was curious because I looked at all your information and thought, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, because the instant is generally always much more efficient. Yeah, that's
the other thing too. The taps. If the taps have a really high flow of water coming through them, then you're going to have a lot more gas use as well.
Yeah, that's unusual, but yeah, I wonder. Hard to tell.
Yeah.
We're going to have to come to a close there for today. Sorry to interrupt, but we do need to finish it at 12. And just one thing I would like to say, just from my personal experience, to confirm what Lucinda was saying about trade people, is that you do need to look at that very carefully. As I was saying earlier, I've been involved with a new build of a couple of units in Healesville, and I've been very particular with the builder about the insulation. And I noticed a number of different things. One is that when the insulation was installed, that the installers themselves just poked the insulation for the ceiling up above the rafters and didn't really get up through the manhole to push it down again, so that it provided an adequate cover. And that was from the actual installation. And then with the electrician, insulation was pulled off when he was applying things, and particularly with light switches, just insulation was pulled out and thrown on the floor, and the same with the plumbers. So you do really need to pay a lot of attention to this. And after the after the building was completed internally, I went through with an energy assessor with an infrared camera just to check out where the heat loss was in the building. And it was amazing that even with the construction with steel lintels, for example, you get loss through the steel lintel, which is not generally insulated because it's part of the structure. So all of these things, I think, still need attention within the future. But I think this work that's being done now and setting up the scorecard, and especially looking at the possibility of scorecards assessments being required for new rentals and for the sale of buildings and so on, I think that's a step in the right direction. But I'd like to thank you very much, Lucinda, for once again an excellent presentation, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it and got a lot of information that they can take home and think about, and more appropriately, perhaps even do some things with their homes and get an assessment done either by a local community assessor who might be available through their local community energy group free of charge if they've got one or two there who have had some training, or alternatively to pay I think it's around $300, $400, $500 the fee for an assessor with a professional, depending on the number of bedrooms in the home. I did that some years ago in my place. I thought it was really worthwhile, and very interesting reading the report that comes as part of that assessment as well. So I can strongly recommend that.
Me too. So, that's how I actually got into this, was having an assessment done. It was so useful.
Yeah, it's very good. So yeah, that brings us to the end of our third session. Thank you all very much for attending. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have Gerald Ahrens from Como Energy next time. And then when Gerald has finished, 2 weeks after that, we'll have our excursion, our site visit up to Mount Tullibawong and to the Wandin water treatment plant with Yarra Valley Water. And we will send you information through Pakenham Living and Learning and through the Emerald Community House as to how you can register for that. You will have to register for it because Yarra Valley Water requires us to take people together in a bus So you will make your own ways up to Mount Toolabawong, and then we'll need to meet in Hillsville so that we can get everybody onto a bus to go to the Yarra Valley Water site. They don't want people coming individually in their cars there. They don't have the accommodation for it. So you will have to register. So if you do know anybody who's been involved in this program, just let them know that, and there will be an email coming out from Pakenham and Emerald about how to register. We'll set up a good registration system for that purpose. So yeah, well, thank you very much again for attending. There has been a video that's been made of this session, and it will be up hopefully within the next week, and everybody will be informed what the URL is to be able to access all of the videos, so that you'll be able to have a look at them.
Thank you.
Goodbye for now from me and from Lucinda, and we look forward to seeing you at Gerald's session at 10 o'clock next Saturday. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Lucinda.
Thank you.